I think it's 12:02, and we have a couple people still trickling in, but I think we'll get started just so we can kind of stay on time. Um, so, Hi everyone. My name is Dana Williams, and I am the Community Science Coordinator at the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, which is the parent organization for the Second Vermont Butterfly Atlas. So, welcome to the first webinar in our Lunch and Learn series. This series will be running every other Wednesday from now until the end of May, and we hope that it will serve to help you get really excited about butterflying this season and also help you pick up some new tips and tricks that will help you better understand butterflies. So today, since this is a intro, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Second Vermont Butterfly Atlas, where we are in that project, and how butterflies are faring, and then we'll get into some ID tips for Duskywings. So if you have any questions during the presentation, you can add them to the chat. I'll be monitoring that, and at the end, we'll have the chance to unmute and ask questions. Again, this webinar is being recorded, and I'll be sending around the video to everyone who's registered. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, the Vermont Center for Eco Studies is a biodiversity research and monitoring nonprofit with a strong emphasis on community science, which means that it's not just professional scientists working on our projects, it's also people in the community like you who have a passion for wildlife and the environment and are looking for ways to help. We mostly work on birds, bees, and butterflies. And in addition to the Butterfly Atlas, you might have heard of us from some of our other projects like the Wild Bee Atlas, which we completed a few years ago, where our community went out and discovered 352 species of native bees in Vermont. And we also run the well-loved Vermont Loon Conservation Project, which has brought common loon numbers in the state up from 7 nesting pairs in the 1980s to over 115 pairs today. We're based in White River Junction, but we work all over Vermont, and as well as some of our projects extend throughout the Northeast, nationally, and also internationally. We are a donor-supported organization, and individuals like you support us in many ways, including by volunteering for our many community science projects, donating to support our efforts, and helping us spread the word about the very cool biodiversity that we have in our state. Many of those of you who are attending today have been crucial in the success of these programs. I'm just going to drop some links in the chat that you can use to explore more. So the Butterfly Atlas is a 5-year effort to document all butterfly species in the state. And we do this because if we want to conserve butterflies, we need to know which species are here, where they are, and how big their populations are so that we can figure out which ones are most vulnerable and in need of help. Now, this effort started with the State Department in 1995, where scientists went out and documented 89 species at these locations. But as you can see from where the sites are, they're mostly focused around Burlington, likely because of staff time and budget constraints. And they weren't able to go out and survey the wide diversity of habitats we have in the state, which means they missed some of those specialized butterflies that live in those habitats. Now, in 2002, VC's conservation scientist, Kent McFarland, took up this cause and said, well, if we can't get out and visit all these places in Vermont ourselves, let's get the community involved. So volunteers for the first Butterfly Atlas went out across the state to look for butterflies. And they were very successful, submitting over 30,000 butterfly records. And as you can see from this map, they really kind of went everywhere. Now, Kent also went into a bunch of museums and looked through historical records from butterfly clubs and enthusiasts going back to the 1800s. So the Atlas managed to increase our species list size to 108 species in Vermont, and it also was used to put together the first list of species of greatest conservation need, which is used by the state to direct conservation priorities. Now, in 2023, Vermont became the first state in the country to run a second atlas. We're just starting year 4, and already we've increased our species list to 120, with 4 of those species being discovered so far during this atlas. We've had over 700 participants who submitted over 33,000 butterfly sightings through websites like iNaturalist and eButterfly. Got some more people coming in. So you've probably heard about the dramatic decline of butterflies and general insect populations that's happening across the world. And a lot can happen over 20 years, which was the gap that we had between the first and the second atlas. For instance, a new threat might emerge that makes a different species suddenly vulnerable, or we might be doing conservation efforts that are working really well and a species has recovered and is now doing fine. Regardless, it's important that when we're making conservation decisions, we have up-to-date and accurate information. These headlines are all talking about a study that came out last year looking at how butterfly populations changed in the United States between 2000 and 2020. Now, this study estimated that a fifth of individual butterflies in the United States have disappeared over this time period. A third of butterfly species have been found to have declining populations, and of those third, 107 species have lost over 50% of their populations. Now, this is a dramatic drop in butterfly numbers, and it turns out that you might notice if you never see a butterfly again, but if you don't know different species or if you're not out counting how often you see them, you can miss these really dramatic declines, sometimes not until it's too late. Now, this study was put together with 12.6 million individual butterfly records from across the United States. And of course, there's not enough funds and time for academics to be collecting everything on their own. And instead, they also relied on community science, just like our atlas. And all of these records were collected by land trust volunteers, hikers, butterfly enthusiasts, and people in their backyards. And if you have a New York Times subscription, I'm going to drop a link to that New York Times article that they wrote about the study. So looking a little bit closer to home, this study also broke down these numbers by region. And in the Northeast, which they looked at from Maine down to Virginia, we actually have a higher rate of decline than the rest of the country. And we've lost about a third of our butterflies in the past 20 years. But these population changes also differ by species. So some species are enjoying a boost from climate change, like the giant swallowtail, which is moving up from the south with warmer temperatures. And other species are really struggling, like the Compton's tortoiseshell. And they're struggling with all of the usual culprits, things like habitat degradation, pesticide exposure, invasive species. And again, those warming temperatures have different effects on different species. So the Compton tortoiseshell is not enjoying them the way that the giant swallowtail is. For a lot of species, though, we don't know enough about them to estimate their current or future populations. And without these estimates, these species can get left out of conservation management plans. And the second atlas is helping us discover more about these species and also helping us know what things have changed, specifically in Vermont, for the past 20 years. And then you can read that full report in the chat. So last year, we had over 10,000 observations of butterflies made by hundreds of volunteers in Vermont, including the first record for a new species for the state, the red-banded hairstreak, seen by Kevin Hemian down in Bennington. And when we measure our progress on the atlas, we measure it by how complete our priority blocks are. So on the right here, I have a map of our blocks in the state. The red and green blocks are both our priority areas that we're hoping to survey. We've got about 180 sites there, 50 of which have been adopted by volunteers, and 10% of those have been completed, which means that they have reached at least 40 species on that block. Now, that's a bit of a stretch goal. 30 species is about what will be helpful for us. And so we've got about 20% of our remaining blocks that are within the 30 range. So that brings us to a total completion of about 30%. And we have a lot more blocks that are pretty close to done. So we're expecting that this year, that completion number is going to jump a lot. Another new thing last year is that the recent update to the Vermont State Wildlife Action Plan actually used the data from this project to update our state list of species of greatest conservation need. Now, 2 species were removed from this list because they no longer exist in the state, and several other species that are at risk were added as well. And you can see that State Wildlife Action Plan here. So for those of you who are here who are not already part of the Second Vermont Butterfly Atlas, you might be thinking, how can I join? Well, all it takes to contribute to the Atlas is just taking pictures of butterflies and uploading them to one of 2 community science websites, iNaturalist, or eButterfly. So for either of those, you'll need an account. And once you're signed up, you can find a place to butterfly. Now, any butterfly that you submit in Vermont will go into the project, but you can have the biggest impact by visiting one of those red blocks that's near you. You can go out and walk a new trail, walk on a dirt road, visit the pollinator garden at your local library, or even go through a cemetery, which butterflies love. There are lots of places that you can butterfly. Then you just grab your gear, which is your cell phone or a camera and binoculars and a field guide, and head out. And here are some links that you can use to learn more about how to join the project. So moving on to our Duskywings. So Duskywings are part of the skipper family, which is this giant family of butterflies that are pretty challenging to get down to species. But it's at least easy to tell when a butterfly is a skipper. They're typically small in size, which is about the size of a quarter. And unlike other butterflies, they usually rest with their wings partially open. Skippers are built kind of like fighter jets, so they have these strong, thick bodies with little short wings that optimize them for like fast takeoffs and quick maneuvers to evade predators. There are also 6 skippers in Vermont that look different. They typically hold their wings out flat, which has gained them the name the spreadwing skippers. And many of those species are duskywings. So duskywings are in the genus Erinis, which is likely named after the mythological Greek goddesses of vengeance, which are also known as the Furies. Many of our North American butterflies were identified and named in the 1800s, and for some reason, everyone in that period was really into Greek and Roman mythology. So you'll find that a lot of those names come up again and again, either in the butterflies' common names or more commonly in their scientific names. Now, duskywings in particular are interesting because a lot of the common names that you're going to see, if it has a person's name in it, that person is usually an ancient poet. So moving on to ID of duskywings. Duskywings are also small, so again, about the size of a quarter, and they're always this sooty black, gray, or brown color. It's a pretty small group. There's only about 23 species worldwide, and luckily not all of these live in Vermont, so it's easier for us to identify them. Aside from their small size and unflashy colors, duskywings are hard to ID because 2 individuals in the same species can end up looking really different. So that means that when you're looking for characteristics, you want to actually look for multiple characteristics to be able to identify it to species. Many of the species are also kind of shy, which means they're very flighty. If you get near them, they'll fly away quite quickly, which can also make them difficult to find. So we're going to do a little bit of a pop quiz, but don't worry, there's no grades. So if you see a small black butterfly in Vermont, it's likely one of these 8 species. They're not all equally likely to be seen, which we'll talk about in a bit. But if you're new to butterflies, these probably all look kind of the same. But 2 of them are not duskywings. So even if you're a total butterfly newbie, I'd love you to take a guess in the chat of which 2 you think are the different ones. All right, we've got a range of what people are entering. I can see a lot of D and E's from people like Terry, who definitely know. And that is indeed our 2 different butterflies are D and E. And one of the hints that you can look for is look at how much white they have in their wings compared to the other species. So these 2 dusky lookalikes are the northern cloudywing and the common sootywing. So the northern cloudywing on the left, you can see it's got more of a, lost half my screen, has more of a brown and black base wing color with these short vertically oriented white stripes instead of the dots that you can see on the others. These white patches are also not really set into a line. You can see that they're kind of jumbled all over the wing. The northern cloudywing is an early summer butterfly. They've been recorded all over the state except in Franklin and Orlean counties, which doesn't mean they're out there. So if you live in those counties, go out and take a look and see if you can find them. However, their populations have declined by 40% over the last 20 years. If you do go out and look for them, you can try and find them near their host plants, which are typically things in the pea family. So on the right is the common sooty wing. You can tell this one has a lot more white than all of the others, so that's a pretty good characteristic to look for. And you can also see that their white dots run all the way down the side of their front of their top wing here. And those dots are also kind of separated into two separate lines. They also have fancy eye makeup going on with these dots appearing over their heads, which you can see is totally absent on the head of the cloudy wing. Now, sooty wings are a more southerly species. So if you draw a line between White River Junction and Rutland, they're mostly going to appear south of there, which doesn't mean they can't be seen elsewhere, but they're just less common. Their host plants are lamb's quarters and anything in the amaranth family, and their population has also been declining by about 30% over the past 20 years. So that leaves us with 6 species of duskywings that you might find in Vermont today. But like I said earlier, how common a species is can be really helpful in starting to narrow down your list of potential IDs. These are the 3 that you're most likely to see in Vermont. And when I say most likely, I mean that we have hundreds of records for each of these species, and the next 3 that we're going to be looking at only have about 6 records or less each. So first, we're going to start quickly in the middle with the juvenile's duskywing, just because I want to direct your attention to the white spots on the edges of their wings. This is a common trait among the duskywings that are sometimes referred to as eye spots. Now I want to point those out. Now I wanted to point those out because if you look on the left at the dreamy duskywing, you can see that they don't have them. This is the easiest way to tell the difference between the dreamy and the other 2 species. And you can remember that trait because the dreamies have their eyes closed because they're sleeping. Now, the dreamy can have 1 or 2 of those white eye spots on their wings, but they won't have this full set like the juveniles and the wild indigo both will have. If you look at this part of the wing, which is called the PM line or the post-medial, which means post or after the medial or middle section of the wing, you can see that they have kind of this really messy 2 layers or sometimes blending into 1 layer of black on that section. These butterflies like willows and poplars, but they've undergone a pretty dramatic decline of 91% of their population has been lost over the past 20 years. So our other 2 duskies, the juveniles and the wild indigo, are harder to identify. But they have some traits that can help tell them apart, especially if you, again, look for several of the traits in the same individual. One thing is that they have different host plants. You'll find the juveniles are more by oaks, while the wild indigos, as their name suggests, will be on wild indigo plants. But they've also adapted to use crown vetch, which is a non-native species that's quite common along roadsides. So the juveniles have been declining by about 60% over the past 20 years, but the wild indigo have been increasing because of the spread of the crown vetch. So the primary evidence you can use to ID them is date. The juvenile's duskywing, which is shown here on the bottom, is primarily out in mid-May to mid-June. So they're a little bit of an earlier butterfly, and they're typically gone by the 2nd week of June. The wild indigo duskywing is going to peak in July to September, so a little bit later in the summer. However, this is just one trait you should be using because there are wild indigo duskywings that can come out earlier into May, and so you do have a little bit of period of overlap. But this, at least, if you're in an extreme part of the date range, you can kind of shift where you're looking, which traits you're looking at by which species you think it is going to be most common at that time. Another trait is size. Although it can be difficult to tell in the field without a comparison there, the juvenile duskywings are a little bit bigger than the wild indigos, and they also have a wider range of sizes that they can be. So in visuals, the juveniles can be anything from the size of a grape to a lime, while the wild indigos are more going to be in the center of that range, around the size of a walnut. Some other traits, sometimes the juveniles can have what's called an apical white spot that's kind of in the center or wrist part of their wing. It's not always reliable because it can be hard to see or it can be absent in them, and very occasionally the wild indigos might have it as well. Another reason to always take pictures of butterflies that you see is that wild indigos have these longer, kind of thinner, more prominent black fingers that reach out around their white eyes. While it's kind of hard to tell or look at that in the field and identify that, if you take a picture, you can bring it back home and compare it to a picture of a juvenile's. Another characteristic that is diagnostic of the two species, but can be pretty difficult to see, is on the underside of the wings. So on the hind wing, which is the bottom wing, the juveniles has two spots right at the top of that bottom wing that are pretty prominent, and they're also translucent, so you can partially see light through them. The wild indigo has these dots in the same area, but they're going to be a little less prominent, and they're also not translucent. As you can tell from both the name, the spread wing skippers, and also these pictures, it is a little bit hard to see the underside of their wings. So last, another kind of interesting thing is that you can identify Duskywings by sex. So you can take a guess in the chat which one of these juveniles Duskywings you think is the male, left or right. And I just want to say I put probably up here because these pictures were not confirmed to be either male or female, but they do show the different traits of the different sexes quite well. So I'm pretty sure I'm correct. Give a couple more seconds in case there's any other guesses coming in. So Terry and Michael are both right. The one on the left is probably the male, and the one on the right is probably a female. And one way to tell them apart is that the females kind of like to dress up. So if you look where the eyes are on the wings, you can see that the female has far more, and they're kind of more prominent, easier to see, and they go all the way from the top to the bottom of that top wing. The male, on the other hand, only has a couple that kind of peter off at the bottom of the top wing. Another thing is that the females have a stronger color contrast between the light and the dark portions of their wings. And on the bottom wings here, you can see that they have more prominent white spots that are kind of, the male's kind of dull and drab and a little bit more faded in colors. Another interesting thing to look for on the males is what's called a costal fold. So this is a membrane flap that they have on the top of their top wing, and it conceals what are called the endoconia, or the male pheromone scent cells. So the things that they use to give off chemicals to attract the females. I think they look a little bit like shoulder pads, so you can remember that the males have shoulder pads. And if you look closely at this zoomed in piece, you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a yellow pattern or yellow coloration on the inside of this costal fold. And those are the scent cells themselves. And if you look from the right angle, you can see them. So those were our three most common Duskywings. These are the three Duskywings that you might see in Vermont, although like I mentioned, each of them has only been seen 6 or fewer times. But you might see them if you travel down to Massachusetts or over into New Hampshire. So first of these is the sleepy Duskywing. Like the dreamy Duskywing, their white eyes are on the edges of their wings are also closed, so they also don't exist, although they might have one or two kind of reduced ones sometimes. One way to tell them apart from the dreamy Duskywings is that their antennae are pretty short, so they're less than half the length of their wings. And while the dreamy Duskywings have pretty long ones that are over half of the length of their wings. Another thing you can see is their PM line again, that kind of double black line that they have there, is very clear and prominent and distinctive in the sleepy Duskywing compared to the dreamy Duskywing that was kind of messy. So the dreamy Duskywing, like sandy pine oak barrens, their host plants are scrub oaks, and they haven't been seen since 2003 in Vermont. However, unlike our first set of Duskies, they are increasing in population. So next in the center here, we have our Horace's Duskywing. Horace is one of those ancient poets that they're named after. So the Horace's Duskywing is out in mid to late summer. So they're kind of a July to September butterfly. They have this lighter brownish color on their wings. And sometimes, but not always, they'll have these little white dots above their eyes. So a little bit of that eye makeup going on. They also like oaks, and they also haven't been seen in Vermont since 2014. But they are coming up from the south. So if you're on kind of the Massachusetts border in the Brattleboro-Bennington area, keep an eye out for them. Their population has doubled over the past 20 years, so they could be moving north. Last is our Columbine Duskywing, which looks very similar to the wild indigo, but they're pretty rare in comparison. Their host plants are the red columbine that you'll see on rocky ledges in the spring. If you see a dark Duskywing early in the spring around those dark, rocky ledges, then it could be a Columbine Duskywing, although the wild indigos will also use columbine as a host plant. It's a little less rare, or a little less common. These species do produce 2 generations in a summer. So one is in that early part of the year, which might help you differentiate it a little bit from the wild indigo. But they do also produce another generation in July and August, which is the peak of the wild indigo season. These ones have been found a little bit more on the western edge of the state in Bennington, Burlington, and Middlebury. And the last one was seen in 2003, also by Kevin Hemian. Last is our 7th Duskywing that's been recorded in the state. This one is the Perseus Duskywing, also a poet. However, they've been extirpated, which means they've disappeared not only from Vermont, but also from the entire Northeast. Currently, their population is entirely west of the Rockies, so you're not going to run into this unless you're out in Colorado. When they were here, though, they were often found in pine barrens, and they hosted on wild lupin. So if you want to take a deeper dive into the Duskywings, I recommend looking at George DeWolf's slides, which I will drop in the chat now. These are based in New Hampshire, off of New Hampshire butterflies, but the characteristics are the same and the species are the same. Just the frequency that's different. All right, so to finish off, I wanted to do another quiz, but if you know the answer, don't immediately put it in the chat. We're going to walk through the characteristics one by one. So here's our question. Which butterfly is in this picture? And I've got our options on the bottom. So our first question is, do we have white eyes on this butterfly? And you can add your answer to the chat. All right, Jill says yes, it is true. And not only do we have white eyes, but we also have more than 3 white eyes present. So that's going to take out, this is probably not the dreamy or the sleepy Duskywing. Our next question is, what's the flight period for this? When was it observed? You can see at the top I put that this one was seen at the end of July. So it's a late summer butterfly, which means we're probably not going to have it be a juveniles. And the last question is it in Vermont? And I can say that this one was taken by Kent McFarland, and he took it in Woodstock, Vermont. So that is definitely in the center of Vermont, which means it's probably not the Horaces or the Columbine. So this butterfly is our wild indigo, our most common species. All right, so that's it for this webinar. Our next one will be on April 8th with Amber Jones looking at caterpillars and their host plants. So just like this one, I will send out the Zoom link on Tuesday morning, the day before the webinar, and this webinar will also be recorded. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat for the rest of the Lunch and Learn Butterflies series. You can learn more and register there. And last, before we open for questions, I want to invite you to come catch butterflies with us. We're co-hosting a bunch of events all across the state this summer. We have two different models. One is a training, which is you're going to come hang out with us. We'll do a presentation inside where we talk about how to ID butterflies and how to use eButterfly as a platform. And then we'll go out and look and see what we can see in the field on a walk. Our other model is a new event that we're running this year called the Butterfly Blitz. And what we're going to do is we're going to meet in an area where we really need butterfly surveys. So in those priority blocks that don't have volunteers who've adopted them yet. And we're going to split into teams. Each one's going to be led by a staff member from VCE. And we're going to go out and take as many surveys as we can on those blocks that we need surveys on. It's going to be kind of a collaborative, lightly competitive, depending on who's in the group event. We'll come back at the end. We'll be out for a couple hours surveying. We'll come back at the end and kind of share and celebrate our results. It's open to anybody of any level. If you're a brand new butterflyer, don't be intimidated. This is a great chance to get together and meet a bunch of butterfly people and learn kind of while you're out doing surveys. All right, so that is it. If anyone has any questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat or you're welcome to unmute and ask as well. Yeah, Sharon, I think the closed eyes memory trick, I feel like came from the Massachusetts Butterfly Atlas, but that's a great way to kind of remember the dreamy and the sleepy, which are appropriately named. I don't know if that's why they named them that, but.
Hi, Dana. This is Melissa.
Hi, Melissa.
Thank you, very informative. Where can we get that training blitz schedule? Once the seminar is over, it's going to go away.
Yeah. So on the same page as the Lunch and Learn Butterflies, which I dropped in the chat, the bottom half of that page has the blitz schedule. The registrations for those aren't opened yet, but the Grafton one is the Summer BioBlitz. That's going to be with the Nature Museum. So they are running a BioBlitz all day, and we're going to be running the Butterfly Blitz during that event, kind of as an activity.
Since another question is, they like the legumes. So does that mean that they go into their larval stage close to the ground?
Yeah. Typically, when butterflies will go and lay their eggs directly on the host plant, usually. And so the pea family is all kind of close to the ground. And so, yes, when they would hatch on the plant and be caterpillars and eat the plant there.
Thank you.
All right, so if there's not any other questions, we're done for today. I will see you again on April 8th. I'll stick around for a couple minutes if anyone has anything else that they didn't want to ask in the whole group. But otherwise, happy butterflying.